Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible...
That moment right there, it sounds straightforward. But it isn't. Because the real tension isn't just in the question. It's in what happens when the answer tries to dodge it. And once you see the full exchange, the meaning shifts in a way most people didn't catch.
Senator King.
Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
Talk
to people that serve at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on a defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting, in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
That's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're
view-
adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's two bills, one budget.
Haven't asked my
We're
question
working with
yet. Why is it-
OMB,
why is it
and
being
we
done
feel
this
very
way?
comfortable
Why
with
is it
the
being
number of
done this way?
961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department, and it's a
It is
13%
not.
increase over what Joe Biden
It is a
gave us.
two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What just happened in this exchange is more layered than it first appears, and the transcript provides a clear record of how the confrontation unfolded and where it broke down. The questioning begins with a deliberate reframing of history. Senator King establishes his own evolution, moving from a cultural upbringing where Robert E. Lee was revered to a position grounded in a different historical interpretation. He does not present this as abstract debate. He anchors it in specific claims that Lee took up arms against the United States, that he broke an oath, and that his actions align with what King calls the classic definition of a traitor. That framing is not incidental. It sets the standard for everything that follows. From there, the line of questioning narrows quickly. King does not remain in generalities. He targets a specific policy decision, the renaming, or, as he characterizes it, the restoration of military base names associated with Confederate figures. His central question is repeated in multiple forms. Why is this being done? What is the motivation, and who is driving the decision? The repetition matters. It is not rhetorical excess. It is a pressure tactic designed to force a clear articulation of intent. The response does not engage directly with that framing. Instead, it pivots. The Secretary shifts the focus away from the historical figures themselves and toward present-day service members. The emphasis is placed on legacy, connection, and the emotional attachment soldiers have to the names of the bases where they trained and served. This is a reframing from moral evaluation of historical figures to contemporary sentiment among troops. The record shows that the question about motivation, specifically why honor individuals who fought against the United States in defense of slavery, is not answered directly. Instead, the answer substitutes a different justification: morale and continuity. When pressed again, the response expands on that substitution. The Secretary asserts that service members themselves support the return to those names, stating that to a man and to a woman they approve. This is presented as a universal sentiment, though no evidence is provided within the exchange to substantiate that claim. At that point, the exchange reaches its first clear point of contradiction. King explicitly rejects the premise that this is about erasing history. He states the opposite, that removing those names is an act of recognizing history accurately, particularly the role of slavery and rebellion in the Civil War. This is a direct clash of definitions. One side frames the change as erasure, the other frames it as correction. What follows is significant. The Secretary does not return to the underlying historical argument. He does not dispute the characterization of the Civil War as being fundamentally tied to slavery. He does not challenge the assertion that Confederate leaders took up arms against the United States. Those points are left uncontested in the record. Instead, the justification remains anchored in present-day sentiment and administrative framing, specifically the idea that Congress imposed limits that required selecting alternative names, and that the current decision restores something lost. This is where the exchange reveals a structural gap. The original question, why honor individuals who fought against the United States in defense of slavery, remains unanswered. The response consistently redirects to how current service members feel about base names, not to whether those names are appropriate given the historical actions of the individuals they reference. That distinction is not minor, it defines the entire exchange. The second phase of the hearing shifts to budgetary issues, but the pattern established earlier continues. King again presses for clarity, this time on why the defense budget is being presented in two parts, with a portion routed through reconciliation rather than included in a single transparent figure. Here, too, the questioning is precise. He identifies a numerical discrepancy, challenges the structure, and raises concerns about transparency and bipartisan oversight. The response again reframes. The Secretary describes the total figure as meeting strategic needs and characterizes the structure as 2 bills, 1 budget. However, the underlying concern, why the budget is divided in a way that obscures the full picture in the base submission, is not directly resolved. King's follow-up makes that explicit. He states that the approach risks fooling the American people and undermines the committee's traditional bipartisan process. The Secretary denies any intent to mislead, but does not offer a detailed explanation for why the structure was chosen beyond coordination with the Office of Management and Budget. This mirrors the earlier exchange. A direct question is met with a broader framing that does not fully engage with the specific concern being raised. What was not said in either portion of this hearing is as important as what was said. There is no direct defense of the historical figures whose names are being restored. There is no argument presented that addresses their actions during the Civil War or disputes the characterization of those actions. The justification remains entirely forward-looking, focused on present-day sentiment rather than historical evaluation. Similarly, on the budget issue, there is no detailed explanation of why a unified presentation was not used, despite repeated requests for one. The structural choice is defended but not fully explained. The pattern here is not subtle. In both cases, the questioning seeks clarity on motivations and underlying rationale. In both cases, the responses shift the frame to adjacent considerations, morale in one instance, procedural structure in the other, without fully addressing the core of the question. This is not a matter of interpretation. The transcript documents the sequence clearly. The bigger picture extends beyond this single exchange. It reflects a broader tension in how policy decisions are justified. One approach prioritizes historical accountability and transparency in process. The other emphasizes continuity, sentiment, and administrative framing. When those approaches collide, the result is what this hearing demonstrates: parallel arguments that do not fully intersect. King is asking, why are we making these choices, and what do they say about our values and priorities? The responses answer a different question. How do these choices affect current stakeholders, and how are they being implemented? Because those questions are not the same, the answers do not resolve the concerns being raised. The final moments of the exchange reinforce that gap. King reiterates his request for a straightforward and honest budget. The Secretary reiterates that the current structure is valid. No additional clarification is offered. None is attempted. That answer will matter later, and not in his favor. The record shows a consistent pattern: direct questions about motivation and transparency met with responses that reframe rather than resolve. When you strip away the deflection, what remains is a set of decisions that are justified without fully addressing the concerns they raise. And in a hearing setting, where clarity is the objective, that absence is itself a finding. Final verdict: the exchange did not produce a direct defense of the policy choices under scrutiny. It produced a series of justifications that operate alongside the questions, but do not answer them. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?